Thank you. Thanks for coming. They should reboot that. A new Marvin the Martian would be fantastic. Well, thanks for coming, Mr. Weber.
Right.
So you're a big-time Hollywood producer, right? It says that on your card now, right? X-Men movies, Fantastic Four movies, all that kind of stuff. But you got your start with Star Trek. Star Trek 2, actually. How did you get involved in Star Trek? How did that become your beginning in Hollywood?
Harv Bennett was a guy who took a chance on me. And I have no business being in this business. I'm a history major from Berkeley. I got a job at a department store doing industrial videos. And the woman in personnel there worked at Paramount. And she said, you got to go over there, and they need somebody that knows video. I worked in post-production for about 3 years because I knew about video, and Paramount post-production was all film. They didn't have anything to do, so I learned film. And I got very involved with the Star Trek Wrath of Khan movie with Harv Bennett. And then I escaped from Paramount, and he hired me to be on Star Trek 3. So it was a fun experience on all those movies.
Now, there was a Star Trek 2 had about a 2.5-year gap between the first movie. Star Trek 3 was actually a little bit less than 2 years. It's actually the shortest period of any of the Star Trek films. It was a bit more ambitious than 2, with a little more money. So, was that a challenge to make Star Trek 2 in that time, and what were some of the bigger challenges on that?
Yeah, the first movie was made for $40 million in 1978, 79. Matter of fact, when I started there, first day in the commissary, I saw guys 6'6" with serious foreheads who were coming off the stage from Star Trek Motion Picture. The second movie and the third movies were made under the television division for a lot less money, like 12. And the third movie was made for about 15. We never went on location until the fourth movie. Well, we went on location on this movie for 3 days at Occidental College. You'll see some shots on Vulcan that are actually at Occidental College. So part of the keeping the cost down was doing it all on sound stages. Khan and Kirk never met on Star Trek 2. It was always on view screens. And so we were a little more ambitious. There was a lot more to do and try to make it a bigger looking picture, but it was all mostly on the sound stage. So I think the good thing with Harv at the helm was that when we knew Star Trek 3 was working, we had already begun writing something on 4. And when 4 was out, we were already writing something on 5. That helped that time frame go quickly.
But on this one, this one definitely had a more ambitious post-production and effects budget. There was there was the new space station and the Klingon ship and the Grissom and the Bird of Prey. So there was a lot of new ships, Excelsior. But as I understand, there was also some talk about shooting on the Genesis in Hawaii. Was there a bit of a debate on where do we, because as you said, you had limited money, so was there ever a debate about do we go on location or do we spend a lot more on effects, and how did that kind of work out?
Yeah, it pretty much was about effects. I think when we sort of made the calculations about shooting in Hawaii and dragging the crew over there, it was just, going to be far too expensive on those budgets. But again, these movies are made at a different era. They're a little more serious. They're more adult in the sense of the themes that are there, and less about running and spinning and jumping and fighting. And part of that, makes it a little easier to achieve on stage than it does in today's. The bar is different. The bar's raised much higher today.
Speaking of that stage, one day there was a fire on the stage. What was your first reaction when someone said, the stage is on fire?
Actually, there was a couple different things, because the stage, there was a fire on set, and you'll see when you watch again, all of that stuff of the Genesis planet was on stage, and we were, intentionally using those fires. But actually what I remember more is that the back lot burned down while we were shooting on stage 15 at Paramount. And I remember going to wardrobe to get something on one of the studio bikes, came around the corner back to the stage, and fell off the bike from the heat that was coming from backlot burning. And we shut down that day. Bill did manage to get a fire hose, or a garden hose rather, and hose down the side of the stage for the Bill Shatner for the news cameras. Absolutely. Never miss a moment. Yeah, I think we were trying some things there with an earthquake and fire and smoke and all that stuff on stage, which was quite ambitious for anybody doing a feature film, let alone trying to match up to some of the effects we had on the TV series.
All the first three Star Trek movies were kind of made in the shadow of the first three Star Wars movies. Each Star Trek film kind of followed a year and a half after, and yet obviously both were using ILM through the whole process. And I know you worked very closely with ILM. How did you feel that kind of pressure to be different, and what did you do to make the effects and the films differentiated from the Star Wars films?
Well, again, I think maybe you heard this if you heard Nick Meyer last week, that there's really more, these movies are more like opera. It's more like Horatio Hornblower. And so like great galleons in space, firing each other. It was less of little tiny ships running around and like little nits, going at each other. So it's a different story altogether. So I think in some ways the effects were harder because we were trying to make these shots look good over a long distance. The ship, long, loving shots on a ship are much harder to do in an era of doing opticals than it is to make short, quick cuts. So in some ways it was harder to do the work that we were asking them to do. But at the same time, I think we benefited from some of their work in building the space station and designing new ships and all of that. So we re-engineered a lot of the models themselves from the motion picture.
Now, this era of filmmaking with the Star Wars films and the Star Trek films were kind of the beginning of the era where you had lots of fan interest and lots of concern over secrecy on the set. And I know this film had a lot of things. There's people who get killed, there's a certain ship that gets destroyed. Tell us, what did you do on the set to try to keep all these secrets? And then how is that different today with like the X-Men movies and the other films that you work on these days?
Well, we actually pioneered some things, I think, on security. We talked with different government agencies about how they did stuff, and they, special paper you can't Xerox, and that was just far too expensive and complicated. But we actually had, in our movies, a unique thing that we could do. And so not only did I make my assistants code the scripts or stamp them with a number, so every page had a number. So for your script, if your script was number 73, every page had a big red stamp on it, 73 in every page. But because we used Stargates, 4 pages in, whenever at the beginning of the movie Bill or someone talks about a particular Stardate, you wouldn't know this unless you compared your script with someone else's. But on page 4 of your script with the Stardate, that Stardate was unique to your number. That's right. So that was kept in a log. And so I could tell even if you retyped the script, you'd retype the code back in. So I could look at page 4 of any script and tell you whose script it was. Now the process worked great, except that we had one notorious script that got lost. And it was Michael Eisner, and he left it on a plane. And he was the head of the studio. So, when you sort of beat up the groups of electricians to care for their script, and the head of the studio leaves it on a plane, it's like, well, whatever.